I'm 34 now, but for most of my life, I felt like I was living in the shadow of my older brother, Daniel. He was the golden child, the prodigy, the walking embodiment of everything my parents thought success should look like. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, business school, perfect hair, polished smile. You get the idea. Meanwhile, I was the creative one, the one who still hasn't figured it out yet. My name's Ryan, by the way, and if I had $1 for every time I heard my mother say, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" I'd have been rich long before I actually was. The thing about growing up as the less impressive child is that you learn to listen more than you talk. You learn how to fade into the background when your parents beam over someone else's achievements. I remember one Christmas, I just finished my first small web design project for a local cafe. A gig I'd been proud of because it meant I was making something of my own. Daniel, on the other hand, had just been accepted into an Ivy League MBA program. When he announced it over dinner, my mom actually teared up. My dad raised his glass. Then, as if to balance the universe, my mom looked at me and said, "Ryan, maybe one day you'll find something that inspires you too." I was 22. I had a job. I had clients. But in their eyes, I was still the one trying to figure it out. Daniel had a way of making everything sound like a subtle insult. He'd smile when he talked to me, but there was always something under it, that smug tone that said, "You're not on my level." He'd say things like, "Still freelancing, huh?" Or, "When are you going to get a real job?" The last time we were all together before everything changed, he laughed when I told him I was building a small startup with 2 friends. "Cute," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You should call me when it makes a profit, or when you pay yourself more than minimum wage." My parents didn't say a word. My mom even chuckled. That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. Not the words themselves, but the silence that follows. The way people's eyes shift, the way the air changes in the room, like you're a guest in your own family. Over time, I stopped bringing up what I was doing. I stopped trying to prove anything. I just focused on work, stayed quiet, and let them think I was still figuring it out. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask, was that the startup I co-founded wasn't small anymore. In fact, by the time Daniel launched his own company a few years later, mine had already been acquired. Quietly, discreetly, I walked away with enough to live comfortably and invest in other ventures. But I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not even my parents. I wanted peace, not praise. I wanted to see what people were like when they thought you had nothing to offer them. That peace didn't last long. Because one evening, out of nowhere, my dad called me for dinner. "Your brother's coming home," he said. "He's got big news. We're all celebrating." I remember looking at the phone for a long moment before agreeing to come. It had been over a year since I'd last seen them, and I was curious, not hopeful, just curious, whether anything had changed. The dinner was exactly how I remembered it. My mom had set the table with her fancy silverware, and my dad was already on his second glass of wine before I arrived. Daniel, of course, was there early, sitting at the head of the table as if it were his by right. He stood up, arms wide. "Ryan," he said, grinning. "Still breathing, huh?" He laughed before hugging me. One of those fake, one-armed hugs that last half a second. "How's the tech thing you were doing?" "Good," I said simply, taking my seat. He chuckled. "Still mysterious, huh? Always playing the Enigma card." Mom swooped in before I could reply, placing a bowl of roasted potatoes on the table. "Daniel's got such exciting news," she said with that light, floaty tone she used when she was about to brag. "Tell him, sweetie." Daniel didn't need encouragement. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his smile growing wider. "We just secured a new round of funding for my startup," he said, pausing dramatically. $3.2 million. Mom clapped. Dad whistled. "That's my boy," Dad said proudly, raising his glass again. "Hard work pays off." I smiled. "That's great, man. Congrats." Daniel gave a half shrug, pretending to be humble. "Thanks, bro. You know how it is. Investors love a solid plan and a real team. It's a lot different from those side projects you used to tinker with." There it was again, that same quiet knife disguised as small talk. I just nodded and took a sip of my drink, pretending not to care. But deep down, something twisted. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. The kind of moment when you realize someone has never actually seen you, not once, in all the years you've known them. As the evening went on, the conversation turned to Daniel's company, his plans for expansion, his vision. My parents hung on every word. At one point, my mom asked, Ryan, maybe you could help your brother out a little. You're both in tech, aren't you? Daniel snorted. Mom, please. No offense, but this isn't a garage project. We're dealing with serious investors here. I just smiled faintly. None taken. He kept talking, and I kept listening, but not to his words. I was studying his tone, his confidence, his absolute certainty that he was the superior one. He mentioned his main investor a few times, an anonymous backer who had recently acquired a controlling share. He didn't know who it was, but he spoke about them like they were the devil. Whoever it is, he said, they've been changing things, tightening budgets, asking for financial transparency, putting pressure on me to adjust the direction. I swear, it's like they want me out of my own company. My father frowned. That's awful, son. Can't you do something about it? Daniel sighed dramatically. I'm trying. But this investor owns the majority stake. It's infuriating. I built this company from nothing, and now some suit behind a desk thinks they can tell me how to run it. I stirred my drink slowly, keeping my expression neutral. That sounds frustrating, I said quietly. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. You have no idea, man. People like that, they think just because they've got money, they can control everything. I swear, if I ever meet that person, I'll tell them exactly what I think. He looked around the table, seeking sympathy. My parents nodded solemnly, muttering things about corporate greed and ungrateful investors. I said nothing. That was the moment I realized something. They still had no idea. They didn't know who I'd become. They didn't know the little tech thing I used to work on was one of the early successes that funded people like him. They didn't know I'd been sitting across from them all night, quietly listening as my brother ranted about me, his anonymous investor, while still believing I was the underachiever of the family. It would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. The night went on, and the wine kept flowing. My parents grew nostalgic, reminiscing about our childhood. Every story somehow circled back to Daniel. How clever he was, how ambitious, how he always had that spark. When it came to me, they smiled politely and said things like, Ryan was always a dreamer. I just nodded along. I'd heard it all before. But when dessert came, something shifted. Daniel leaned back in his chair and said, You know, Mom, Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time Ryan joined my team. I mean, I could probably find him something. Nothing major, but maybe in marketing or support or something. My mother's face lit up. That's a wonderful idea. I almost laughed. He said it like charity, like offering scraps to someone who should be grateful for them. I didn't respond right away. I just let the silence stretch, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Daniel smirked. What do you say, bro? Tired of those little gigs? Come work for me. I'll even make sure you get a nice title. Creative consultant or something. My dad chuckled. See? That's family looking out for family. I looked down at my plate for a long moment. I could feel something building in my chest. Not anger, not pride, but something colder. A sense that this was the moment things would start to change, one way or another. I placed my fork down gently, wiped my hands, and looked at Daniel across the table. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, my voice calm. But I think I'll pass. He grinned. Suit yourself. I was just trying to help. Of course, I said softly, meeting his eyes. You always do. He didn't notice the look in mine. But I knew this dinner, this night, was going to be the last time any of us would sit together and pretend the hierarchy in this family still existed. Because the truth was about to surface soon, and when it did, Daniel wouldn't be laughing anymore. After that dinner, something inside me shifted, not in an explosive way, but quietly, like a door closing in my mind. For years, I'd lived as the quiet one, the humble brother, the one who didn't stir up trouble or fight for recognition. But sitting there that night, listening to Daniel talk about helping me out, it became painfully clear that nothing I did would ever change how my parents saw me. Their golden boy could do no wrong, and I was the footnote in his story. A few days later, my mom called. Ryan, she began, with that overly cheerful voice she used when she wanted something. Your brother mentioned you didn't seem too enthusiastic about joining his company. He really wants to help you, sweetheart. Don't let pride get in the way of a good opportunity. I sat there on the phone, staring at the wall. Mom, I'm fine. I have my own work. I know. Honey, she said quickly. But Daniel's company is growing fast. It's a good chance to learn from someone who's really successful. You could use that kind of experience. There it was again, That quiet dagger, hidden under sweetness. Experience. As if everything I'd built on my own didn't count because I didn't flaunt it. Mom, I said, keeping my tone even, I don't need a job. I'm doing well on my own. There was a pause, then a soft sigh. You always say that, Ryan. But maybe it's time to admit you need some help. Daniel's trying to look out for you. I didn't respond right away. I could hear her in the background calling to my dad, telling him I was being stubborn again. My father took the phone next. Son, listen, he said in that no-nonsense tone that used to make me feel 12 years old again. Your brother's trying to throw you a rope. Don't slap his hand away. You're not getting any younger, you know. I almost laughed. Dad, I'm 34, not lost in a storm. I've got steady work. He grunted. Freelancing isn't the same as building a career. You need stability, benefits, retirement. I'm fine. Fine isn't good enough, he snapped, his patience thinning. You could learn a lot from your brother. He's built something from nothing. I cut him before he could finish. So did I, Dad. There was a silence. Not because he was thinking, but because he didn't believe it. I could almost hear the shrug in his voice when he replied, if you say so. That was our dynamic in a nutshell. If Daniel said something, it was fact. If I said something, it was theory. I ended the call as politely as I could, but I sat in silence for a long while afterward. The same thought kept running through my mind. They'll never see me. No matter what I did, no matter how successful I quietly became, they'd never look past Daniel. A few weeks went by before I saw my family again, but they didn't stay quiet for long. My mom invited me over for a Sunday lunch, just a casual get-together. I knew what that meant, another round of passive comparison disguised as family bonding. But I went, maybe out of habit, maybe out of curiosity. When I got there, Daniel was already sitting in the backyard with my dad, both of them laughing over beers. The minute I walked in, Daniel grinned. Hey, look who finally joined the land of the living. Hey, Dan, I said flatly. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit down, man. I was just telling Dad about this new investor problem. You wouldn't believe the hoops they're making me jump through. Total control freak. I sat, careful not to react. Dad frowned. You said they're trying to change the whole direction of the company? Daniel sighed, shaking his head dramatically. Yeah, they're demanding cuts, restructuring, all these restrictions. It's ridiculous. They don't even understand the product, but they're pulling the strings like they own me. I raised an eyebrow. Well, technically they do. Daniel shot me a look. Funny. You sound just like them. I smirked faintly, but said nothing. My mom came outside with a tray of sandwiches, smiling brightly. Let's not talk about work, boys. We're family. That lasted about 5 minutes. As soon as we started eating, my mom turned to me and said, So, Ryan, have you thought more about your brother's offer? I really think it would give you some direction. Daniel chimed in immediately, feigning humility. It's not even a big deal, Mom. I just hate seeing him wasting his potential on random gigs. He's talented, sure, but he needs structure. Structure, my dad repeated, nodding like it was some grand revelation. That's exactly what you've been missing. I took a slow sip of water, fighting the urge to laugh. Structure, they said, as if I hadn't built multiple successful ventures from scratch, as if I didn't employ more people indirectly through my investments than Daniel did in his entire company. I leaned back in my chair. I appreciate the concern, but I'm happy doing my own thing. Daniel shrugged. Hey, man, no judgment. If you're fine staying small time, that's cool. Not everyone wants the pressure of running something big. Mom scolded him lightly, but she was smiling. Oh, don't tease your brother. He just doesn't have the same ambition you do. Dad added, different strokes. Daniel's a go-getter. Ryan's more relaxed. I smiled politely. Relaxed. That was their word for failure. That day I left early. My brother had started talking about his new office, his car, his networking opportunities, while my parents beamed like he'd cured a disease. The last thing I heard before walking out the door was my mother saying, maybe one day Ryan will find something like that too. Driving home, I remember thinking how surreal it all felt. They had no idea who I really was anymore, what I'd built, what I'd become. It wasn't even about validation anymore. It was about realizing how deeply they'd chosen blindness over reality. The funny thing about being underestimated for years is that people start telling you things they'd never reveal to anyone they take seriously. A few days later, Daniel called me. His tone was unusually casual. Hey, Ree, he said. Quick question. You still have that friend in tech investments, right? The one you mentioned ages ago. I knew exactly what he was doing. Fishing. Maybe, I said cautiously. He chuckled. Well, look, no big deal. Just wondering if he's ever heard of the investor behind my company. We're trying to figure out who this clown is. Total control freak, messing with everything. I smirked. Sounds rough. He sighed. Yeah, well, I'm not worried. I'll figure out who it is eventually. And when I do, he paused, his voice tightening. Let's just say they'll regret trying to cross me. I didn't answer. He went on. Anyway, if your friend ever finds out anything, let me know. I'd love to have a chat with whoever thinks they own me. Sure, I said. If I hear anything. When I hung up, I couldn't help but laugh softly to myself. It was so perfectly ironic. The arrogance, the entitlement, the complete lack of self-awareness. He'd spent his life stepping on people he thought were beneath him. And now, without realizing it, he'd handed me the perfect view from above. Weeks turned into months, and things between Daniel and his investor, me, kept getting worse. I'd received updates through the management team. Daniel missing deadlines, overspending, blaming others. He was so busy playing CEO, he'd forgotten how to lead. Every once in a while, I'd get family updates from Mom. Your poor brother is so stressed, she'd say. Those investors are making his life miserable. He works so hard, and they just don't appreciate him. I'd listen quietly, sometimes even nodding. Yeah, I'd say, that sounds tough. She'd sigh dramatically. You could never understand that kind of pressure, sweetheart. You've always been the easygoing one. And I'd just smile. Because deep down, I knew that very soon, everything they thought they knew was going to flip upside down. The cracks were already showing. Daniel's company was bleeding cash, and his temper was starting to show even outside of work. At our next family dinner, he arrived late, disheveled, snapping at my dad for asking simple questions. What do you know about running a company? Daniel snapped. You think it's easy dealing with idiots who want to change everything you've built? My dad frowned. Watch your tone, son. Daniel scoffed. Sorry, but I'm sick of everyone thinking they know better. He turned to me suddenly, eyes sharp. You probably think it's funny, huh? Watching me struggle. I blinked. Why would I think that? Because you've always hated how successful I am, he said bitterly. Don't act like you don't enjoy seeing me get knocked down a peg. Mom jumped in immediately. Daniel, stop it. Your brother's not like that. But her voice was shaky, unsure. I just looked at him calmly. You're imagining things. He glared at me for a few seconds, then scoffed and stood up. Whatever. Some of us have real problems to deal with. He stormed out, slamming the door. My mom looked devastated. He's just under a lot of pressure. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I said softly. I bet he is. They didn't see the irony. Not yet. But I could feel the storm building. The illusion they'd lived under, that Daniel was untouchable and I was the lost one, was starting to crack. And the next time we all sat down for dinner, that illusion would shatter completely. I just didn't know yet how ugly it was going to get when the truth finally came out. The next few months were the quiet kind of chaos, the kind that simmers beneath the surface before it finally boils over. Daniel was unraveling, though my parents refused to see it. Every time I saw them, they'd say things like, your brother's just going through a rough patch, or he'll bounce back. He always does. What they didn't know was that the rough patch was more like a landslide. His company's finances were hemorrhaging, the team was restless, and the board was on edge. As the majority shareholder, I received every update, every report, every panicked email. Still, I stayed quiet. I wanted to see what kind of man Daniel would become when his perfect image began to crack. The answer came sooner than I expected. One Thursday evening, I got a text from my mom. Family dinner this Sunday, important talk. Everyone coming. I knew that tone. It was the kind she used when she was trying to fix something, to mediate between her sons like we were still teenagers fighting over chores. Sunday came, and I arrived a little early. The house looked the same as always. Warm lights, soft piano music playing, the faint smell of my mom's roast in the air. It would have felt comforting if not for the tension humming underneath. My dad was in the living room pretending to read the newspaper, but I could tell he was waiting for something. My mom greeted me at the door with a too bright smile. Ryan, I'm so glad you came, honey. We just want to clear the air tonight. About what? I asked, though I already had a feeling. You'll see, she said, patting my arm and heading back to the kitchen. A few minutes later, Daniel arrived. He looked different, pale, unshaven. The easy arrogance that usually sat on his face was replaced with a sharp, restless energy. He gave me a tight nod. Ryan, Daniel. We took our usual seats at the dining table, me across from him, our parents between us. My mom started with small talk about the food, about Dad's back pain, about anything to delay what we all knew was coming. Finally, Daniel set his glass down a little too hard. All right, he said. Let's just talk about it. My mom blinked. Talk about what, sweetie? He turned his glare on me. You know exactly what. I tilted my head. No, actually, I don't. He leaned forward, eyes narrowed. I found out who my anonymous investor is. The room went silent. I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. My mom looked between us, confused. You did? Oh, that's great, isn't it? Maybe now you can finally meet them, man. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. It's him. He pointed straight at me. My mom froze. What? He didn't look away. Ryan. He's the one. The investor. The one who's been changing everything, pushing me out of my own company. My father frowned. Daniel, that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. Daniel snapped, his voice breaking. I have the documents. The ownership records. The board sent me the confirmation last week. He owns 61% of my company. The air turned thick, heavy. My mom's fork slipped from her hand, clinking against the plate. My dad just stared at me, waiting for me to deny it. But I didn't. I just looked at Daniel and said quietly, So you finally figured it out. He pushed back from the table, his chair screeching across the floor. You bought me out. You took everything I built. I leaned forward slightly. I didn't take anything, Daniel. I made an investment. You took funding. You signed the contracts. Don't twist it, he shouted. You knew what you were doing. You wanted control. You wanted to humiliate me. I shook my head slowly. No, I wanted to help you. I saw potential. You were too busy burning bridges with every investor in the city, so I stepped in quietly to keep your company afloat. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Ryan, is this true? Yes, I said simply. Every word. Why would you do that? She whispered. Why not tell us? Because, I said evenly. I didn't need another lecture about how I should learn from your successful son. I didn't want approval. I just wanted to see if Daniel could actually lead something on his own. Daniel scoffed. You think you're better than me now? Hiding behind money. No, I said, my tone colder now. I just stopped pretending you were better than me. He went red. You ruined my life, Ryan. I raised an eyebrow. How exactly? You've been pulling strings for months. Cutting budgets, changing decisions, making me look like an idiot in front of my team. I didn't deny it. I was cleaning up your messes. The spending, the bad hires, the PR disasters. You were driving it into the ground. My mom covered her mouth, eyes wide. Stop it, both of you. But Daniel wasn't listening. He leaned over the table, his voice shaking with fury. You always envied me. You couldn't stand watching me succeed, so you found a way to take it from me. I stared at him, calm, steady. You succeeded because I let you. You failed because you wouldn't listen. That broke him. He grabbed his glass and threw it against the wall. It shattered, wine streaking down the wallpaper. My mom screamed. My dad stood, yelling his name, but Daniel kept going. You think this makes you the hero? You think you've proved something? You're a parasite. You were nothing before me, nothing. I stood up slowly. You're right. I was nothing to you. And you made sure I felt that way my whole life. But I learned something from it. How to build quietly, how to move without bragging, how to earn what I have without tearing others down. He was trembling now, pointing a finger at me. You bought my company just to destroy me. I took a step closer. No, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure no one else got hurt in the process. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother was crying now, my father standing stiffly with his jaw clenched. Daniel sank into his chair, pale, defeated for the first time in his life. Then, suddenly, he laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You think you've won? Fine. You can have it. But don't come crying to me when it all blows up in your face. Then he stood, shoved his chair aside, and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed so hard the glass in the windows rattled. My mother turned to me, eyes full of tears. Ryan, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, my expression unreadable. Would you have believed me if I had? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My dad sat down slowly, rubbing his temples. You blindsided him, he muttered. That was cruel. I stared at him for a long moment. Cruel? I said softly. You've spent 30 years watching him treat me like a joke. Every insult, every comparison, every time you brushed me off. That was cruel. All I did was tell the truth. He didn't respond. None of them did. I left soon after. As I walked out to my car, I could still hear my mother crying inside, my father murmuring something about fixing this. But I knew there was no fixing it. Not this time. That dinner marked the moment something broke in all of us. The illusion was gone. The fantasy of Daniel as the golden child, me as the aimless one. But the fallout hadn't even started yet. Because 2 weeks later, I learned that Daniel wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. It started with an email, short, vague, but sharp enough to make my stomach turn. "We need to talk. You'll regret this." And that was how the next chapter began. Not with silence, but with a storm I hadn't seen coming. 2 weeks after that dinner, everything went eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels like the air before a thunderstorm. I didn't hear from Daniel, not a word. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email. My parents didn't reach out either. Normally, my mom would have at least called to check in, meaning to probe about how Daniel was taking things. But this time, nothing. It was as if the entire family had frozen in place after that night, too stunned or too ashamed to speak. I should have felt relieved. I thought maybe, just maybe, the silence meant they were processing everything. Maybe they'd finally realized that I wasn't the lost cause they'd made me out to be. But deep down, I knew Daniel too well. He wasn't the type to lick his wounds quietly. He was the type to reload. The first blow came on a Monday morning. I was sitting in my office, a small, minimalist space downtown that I rarely even used. My assistant knocked on the door, looking uneasy. "Ryan, there's something you should see." She handed me a tablet with a headline glowing on the screen. "Tech startup implodes after power struggle between founder and anonymous investor." Beneath it was Daniel's face, front and center, looking defeated but noble, the classic fallen hero look. The article painted a very specific story. According to Daniel, the mysterious investor had systematically dismantled his vision, forcing layoffs, budget cuts, and strategy shifts until the company lost its soul. He described himself as a victim of corporate greed and betrayal. I read every word. Not once did he mention my name, but he didn't need to. The tone, the phrasing, the timeline. Anyone who knew our circle could piece it together. I scrolled to the last line, where he was quoted saying, "I started that company to make something good. I just never thought the person who'd destroy it would be my own family." My stomach turned. By the end of the day, the article had spread across every industry blog and LinkedIn feed that mattered. Former colleagues and investors I'd worked with started calling, not accusing me directly, but probing. "Hey Ryan, what's going on between you and your brother? Is it true you were involved with his company?" I denied nothing, but explained little. That's how I'd always handled things, quietly, professionally, without drama. But inside it burned. Not because of the public attention. I could handle that. But because he'd weaponized the one thing I'd always protected, my privacy. That evening, I called him. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. What are you doing?" No response. By the next morning, I realized this wasn't just a media stunt. He'd filed a formal complaint with the board, claiming I'd used my ownership stake to coerce and undermine his leadership. It was pure theater, but messy enough to drag me into a legal and PR nightmare. The board knew the truth, of course. They'd seen the numbers, the financials, the mess he'd made. But they also knew appearances mattered. "Ryan," one of them said during a tense call, "you might want to take a step back until this dies down. The press isn't doing us any favors right now." I agreed, even though it felt like swallowing glass. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular face in the media, podcasts, business panels, even a feature interview on a local news channel. He played the role perfectly, the visionary undone by a cold investor. He painted himself as misunderstood, betrayed, but resilient. He said things like, "I still believe in family, even after what's happened, and I'm not naming names because I want to move forward with grace." Grace. That word almost made me laugh out loud when I heard it. My parents ate it up. My mom posted the interview on Facebook with a caption, "Proud of my son for staying strong through all this adversity, Red Heart." I stared at it for a long time, wondering if she knew, really knew, what she was doing. Then again, maybe she didn't want to know. It was easier for her to pretend Daniel was the wronged one, the victim. It kept her world tidy. The isolation hit me harder than I expected. I had money, stability, even quiet success, but family? Gone. Overnight, the house I grew up in became a fortress I wasn't welcome in. I tried calling once more, out of pure habit. My dad picked up. Dad, we need to talk about what Daniel's doing. There was a pause. He's been through a lot, Ryan, he said slowly. You blindsided him. You embarrassed him in front of the whole family. I didn't embarrass him, I said, keeping my voice even. I invested in his company to save it. He's the one who turned it into a circus. My dad sighed. You always think you're the smartest person in the room. That one hit deep. It wasn't even anger, just the quiet disappointment in his tone. The same tone he used when I was a kid and brought home a B while Daniel had an A. Dad, I said softly, do you even know what he's saying about me? He hesitated. We don't need to get involved in your business matters. Just make peace with your brother. Peace. I repeated, my throat tightening. He's destroying my reputation. Then rise above it, he said coldly. Be the bigger man. You always say you're mature, prove it. That was the last time I called. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to make them see me. I stopped explaining, stopped defending. I just went quiet. I worked from home, cut down on meetings, ignored the gossip. But at night, when the city lights flickered through my apartment window, I felt it. That ache that comes from being misunderstood by the people you love most. I wasn't angry at losing Daniel anymore. I was angry at losing myself somewhere along the way, at how much of my life I'd spent seeking their approval, their pride, their acknowledgement. And now, even after proving myself beyond measure, they still couldn't see past their old story of who I was. A few months passed. Daniel's media appearances started fading. Investors lost interest in his sob story. His next project never launched. Quietly, people began to realize that the brilliant entrepreneur might not have been as competent as they thought. But the damage was already done. My name wasn't in the tabloids, but it lingered in whispers. The ruthless brother, the silent investor, the family traitor. Still, I didn't fight back. Not yet. I focused on rebuilding my footing. I pulled back from public investments and shifted into private ones under a different name. I started consulting again, anonymously, behind the scenes, for startups that reminded me of the person I used to be. Underestimated, struggling, determined. I thought that was enough. I thought if I just let it go, time would fix the rest. But time doesn't heal things that were never acknowledged. It just hardens them. The turning point came on a quiet afternoon in early spring. I was in a cafe downtown, reviewing some design proposals on my laptop, when I overheard two men at the next table. They were talking about Daniel. Yeah, I heard he's trying to pitch a new app, one said. Can't get funding though. Apparently, his last investor messed him over bad. His brother, right? The other replied. I heard he basically stole his company. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Hearing it from strangers, that was different. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was history being rewritten in real time, right there in front of me. That night, I went home and sat in the dark for a long while. My phone buzzed occasionally, work messages, calendar reminders, but I ignored them. My mind was stuck on one thought. He took everything, not just credit, but control of the story. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the truth. I opened my laptop and started going through old files, contracts, board emails, transaction records. Everything I'd kept neatly stored, untouched. The facts, the proof. As I scrolled, I found a message I'd almost forgotten about. A letter from the acquisition deal years ago, the one that had started it all. It was simple, professional, but there was one line that caught my eye. We appreciate your discretion and the values you've demonstrated in helping struggling founders find stability. That was me. That was the real story. The quiet investor, the one who helped startups grow, not tear them down. And for the first time in months, I felt something stirring again. It wasn't rage. It was resolve. I didn't want to destroy Daniel. I wanted to make him face what he'd done, not through yelling or media wars, but through truth, through undeniable, cold clarity. So I began planning, slowly, carefully, the way I always did. I reached out to old contacts, people who respected me not because of family ties, but because they'd worked with me, seen what I could do. I gathered records, statements, timelines. Every piece I collected was another brick in the foundation of something bigger, not vengeance, but justice. And though part of me still ached for what was lost, the family, the warmth, the hope that things could have been different. Another part of me was finally waking up. Daniel thought he'd buried me in silence. But what he didn't realize was that I'd learned to thrive in it. Because when you've spent your whole life being underestimated, planning quietly is second nature. And by the time the world saw what was coming next, there'd be no mistaking who I really was, or what I was capable of. The next few months became a quiet, deliberate rebuild, not of my company, but of myself. After the chaos Daniel stirred up, I had vanished from the spotlight completely. No interviews, no conferences, no LinkedIn posts. My name had become almost mythical in certain circles, whispered about, but never confirmed. And for the first time in years, I liked it that way. While Daniel scrambled to maintain relevance, I was working behind the curtain, not as Ryan, the little brother, but as someone else entirely. Using one of my holding companies, I began funding new startups under a pseudonym. Not flashy ones with massive PR campaigns like Daniel's, but small, disciplined, overlooked ventures that reminded me of who I used to be: hungry, ignored, and ready to prove everyone wrong. The first one was a two-person AI design startup that had been rejected by half the venture capital firms in the city. I gave them a chance, not just money, but mentorship. I helped them structure their business, scale their platform, and connect with the right people. Within 6 months, they'd landed a government contract. That was the spark. I started building a network: developers, designers, analysts, people tired of corporate games and empty promises. Most of them didn't even know my real last name. I was just R. To them, a silent partner who offered clarity, fairness, and results. And the results came fast. By the end of that year, I had stakes in 7 companies: 4 in tech, 2 in sustainable manufacturing, and 1 in digital education. Each one grew steadily, cleanly, without the media frenzy or inflated egos that plague the startup world. I avoided attention like the plague, letting others take the spotlight while I focused on direction and structure. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing anyone's approval. I wasn't proving anything. I was building. Ironically, my rise coincided with Daniel's fall. Every now and then, his name would pop up in articles, not about success, but lawsuits, debts, and failed pitches. He'd tried launching another company, but investors had learned their lesson. His reputation was too stained. He blamed the corporate system, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. Daniel wasn't a leader. He was a showman. Still, I didn't gloat. I didn't even mention his name to anyone. The best revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet competence. But one afternoon, about a year after our last conversation, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ryan," said a familiar voice, low, tired, but unmistakable. "It's Dad." I hesitated. "Hey." He cleared his throat. "I know it's been a while. Your mother's been worried. About both of you." "Both?" I asked carefully. "Daniel's not doing well," he said bluntly. "Financially, mentally. He lost the house. Some other things too." I stayed quiet. "He says you could fix it," Dad continued, his voice softening. "That if you wanted, you could make this go away." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "He still thinks I owe him something?" My father sighed. "He's your brother." "So, Ryan," he said firmly, "whatever happened, you're both my sons. You've proven your point. You're doing well, he's not. Let it go." There it was, the old expectation, the one I'd been raised with. The golden rule of our family: forgive Daniel, forget yourself. "I already let it go," I said quietly. "He's the one who won't stop digging." Dad didn't answer right away. "You sound cold," he muttered finally. I took a breath. Maybe I just stopped being naive. The call ended soon after. I didn't feel angry, just tired. But that conversation triggered something unexpected. It made me realize that while I'd moved forward professionally, I hadn't truly moved on. Part of me was still anchored to that family, still defined by the way they saw me, or refused to. So, I decided to rewrite that too. The opportunity came out of nowhere. One of the startups I'd funded, a cybersecurity firm, had grown faster than anyone expected. Within months, we were in acquisition talks with a major international corporation. It was the kind of deal that would put us on the map, and me, if I chose to reveal myself, in the spotlight again. Normally, I'd have stayed in the shadows, but something in me shifted. This time, I wanted to step forward, not for fame, not for attention, but because I was done hiding. I met with the CEO of the acquiring company in person. He was an older man, sharp and calm. After our meeting, he said, "You remind me of someone who's had to earn everything twice. Once for himself, and once to convince others it was real." I smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." The deal went through. The payout was huge, more than anything I'd ever seen, even from Daniel's peak days. Overnight, my quiet success turned into something undeniable. People who had once brushed me off started reaching out: journalists, former clients, even investors who'd ghosted me years ago. I didn't respond to most of them, but one message caught my eye. It was from my mom. "Ryan, I saw the news. I had no idea how much you've accomplished. We're proud of you." Truly. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The words I'd wanted to hear my whole life, finally written down. But instead of feeling joy, I felt nothing. Maybe a little sad, because they didn't mean what I used to think they would. I typed back, "Thanks, Mom." Nothing more. That night, I stood by the window in my penthouse apartment, the city stretching out below me, lights blinking, cars humming like distant waves. Everything I'd once dreamed of having was mine. Independence, success, respect. Yet there was still a quiet emptiness there, not bitterness, but acceptance. People always think revenge is about payback. But what they never tell you is that once you finally rise above the people who hurt you, you don't feel powerful. You just feel free. Still, that freedom came with clarity. I could move forward now, but I also knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet, because Daniel wasn't gone. A few weeks later, I got an invitation in the mail. A thick, cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. It was for my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, a family celebration, hosted at a high-end restaurant downtown. At the bottom, written in my mother's handwriting, was a small note: "Please come. It's time we all make peace." Peace. I almost didn't go. I had nothing to prove anymore. But something told me this dinner wasn't just about family. It was about closure. Maybe, finally, the moment to settle everything that had been hanging over us for decades. So I RSVP'd yes. And as I sealed the envelope, I realized I wasn't nervous this time. I wasn't the forgotten son walking into a room where he'd be compared, dismissed, or pitted. I was walking in as the man they never thought I'd become. But I also knew something else. Daniel wouldn't come quietly. Whatever he had planned, whatever bitterness still clung to him, I'd be ready. Because this time, I wasn't walking into his world. He was walking into mine. The night of my parents' anniversary dinner arrived like a scene out of a movie. One of those slow, elegant ones where everything looks polished on the surface, but you can feel the tension humming underneath. The restaurant was one of those places where the waiters glide instead of walk, and every table looks like it costs more than my first apartment. I arrived right on time. Not early. I wasn't that person anymore. And not late. Daniel had taught me that being fashionably late was just another form of ego. When I walked in, my parents were already seated at a long table near the center of the room. My mother's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Ryan," she said, standing to hug me. "You look wonderful." I smiled, returning the hug. "Thanks, Mom. You too." My father nodded, giving me that firm, guarded look that had replaced warmth years ago. "Glad you could make it," he said simply. And then came Daniel. He entered a few minutes later, his tie slightly crooked, his smile forced but confident. He'd lost weight. Stress, probably. And though he was still trying to hold himself like the man he used to be, I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't the same. He looked at me across the table and said with mock cheer, "Well, if it isn't the big shot himself." I gave a calm smile. "Daniel." We shook hands, briefly, firmly, and took our seats. The atmosphere was polite, even pleasant, at first. My mother kept the conversation light, asking about work, travel, food. But underneath it all, I could feel it, that unresolved static between Daniel and me. When the appetizers arrived, he finally broke the silence. "So, Ryan," he said casually, swirling his drink. "I heard about that acquisition deal you pulled off. Impressive." "Thank you," I said. He leaned back, smirking. "Guess all that time playing investor finally paid off. Maybe I should have asked you for advice, huh?" "Maybe," I said mildly, meeting his gaze. "But then again, you never liked listening to advice." He chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Touché." The table went quiet again, and my mother, desperate to keep things civil, launched into a story about their honeymoon. I listened politely, but my attention never left Daniel. He was jittery. tapping his finger against the glass, glancing at me every few minutes like he was waiting for something. And then, halfway through the main course, he finally dropped the act. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice loud enough that a few heads turned, "I was thinking about what you did, Ryan." My mom froze mid-sentence. "Daniel, not here." "No, it's fine," I said, setting down my fork. "Go ahead." He smiled thinly. "You humiliated me, took my company, destroyed my reputation. But you know what? I've been doing some digging lately. Turns out, what you did wasn't exactly clean." My dad frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice dripping with confidence again. "I spoke to a few people, ex-employees, partners, even someone from your so-called investment group. You've got skeletons, little brother. You think you're untouchable, but you're not." I didn't flinch. "You must have been busy." "Oh, I've had plenty of time," he said. "And it's funny. People love talking when you mention a few legal terms. I've got enough to make things interesting for you." He sat back, smiling like he'd just checkmated me. My parents were stunned. My mother whispered, "Daniel, stop this. Please." But I stayed calm, almost amused. I reached into my jacket and placed a small black folder on the table. "That's fascinating," I said quietly. "Because I've been doing some digging too." Daniel's smile faltered. I slid the folder toward him. "Go ahead. Open it." He hesitated, then flipped it open and froze. Inside were documents, board emails, financial statements, legal filings. Everything meticulously organized. "That," I said evenly, "is a record of every time you used company funds for personal expenses. Flights, hotels, luxury cars, even that little business trip to Cabo that somehow included your girlfriend." My father's jaw tightened. "Daniel," I continued, my tone calm but sharp, "you didn't just mismanage your company. You violated your fiduciary duties. The board could have sued you, but they didn't. Do you know why?" He didn't answer. "Because I told them not to," I said softly. "I covered it up. Quietly. To protect you." The color drained from his face. My mother looked between us, horrified. "Ryan, what is this?" "The truth," I said simply. Daniel wasn't pushed out. He was protected by me. I bought controlling interest because I knew what would happen if the board found out. I thought I could save him from himself. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he tried to speak. You're lying." I tilted my head. "You sure?" He looked down at the papers again, his eyes scanning the numbers, the signatures, the undeniable proof. His breathing quickened. My father's voice was low now, quiet but deadly. "You stole from your own company." Daniel stammered. It was for business." My father slammed his hand on the table. "You lied to us. To everyone." The restaurant had gone silent. Even the waiter froze in place, unsure whether to approach. Daniel turned toward me, desperation flashing in his eyes. "You wanted this. You set me up." I shook my head. "No, Daniel. I gave you every chance to succeed. You burned them all." He stood up suddenly, his chair screeching. "You think this fixes anything? You think you win because you made me look bad?" I looked up at him calmly. "I didn't have to make you look bad. You did that yourself." He glared at me for a long moment. And then, just like the night at our parents' house, he stormed out. Only this time, no one followed him. Not my mother. Not my father. They just sat there in silence. My mother looked shattered. My father was staring at the table, his hands clenched. After a moment, I stood and adjusted my jacket. "I didn't come here to embarrass him," I said quietly. "But he needed to stop rewriting history." My mother looked up at me, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" I met her eyes. "Because you wouldn't have believed me." She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped. She knew I was right. I left them sitting there in silence and walked out into the cool night air. The city was alive. Traffic, laughter, light. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Peace. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just the quiet relief of knowing I didn't owe anyone an explanation anymore. As I got into my car, I glanced once through the restaurant window. My parents were still seated, talking softly, their faces pale under the chandelier light. Daniel was gone. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a loss. It felt like balance. He had spent his whole life trying to prove he was above me. All I ever wanted was to stop standing beneath him. And that night, without shouting or gloating, I finally did. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Daniel wasn't done. Not yet. And the storm he was about to unleash next would change everything. For weeks after the anniversary dinner, the fallout rippled through the family like slow poison. Nobody said much at first. No calls, no texts, just silence. I knew my parents were processing everything, trying to reconcile the image they'd built of Daniel with the truth that had sat on the table that night, laid bare in black and white. Then one afternoon, my father showed up at my office without calling ahead. He stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His voice was quiet when he said, "Do you have a minute?" I nodded and gestured for him to sit. He hesitated before speaking. "Your mother's been crying for days. She feels like she doesn't even know her own son anymore." I wasn't sure which son he meant. He ran a hand down his face and sighed. "I didn't believe you when you said he'd been lying. I didn't want to. I thought I was protecting the family. Turns out I was protecting an illusion." That was the first time my father had ever admitted being wrong about Daniel, or about anything, really. He looked up at me. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, leaning back, "he faces the consequences." And he did. A few weeks later, the board of Daniel's company, now under my control, formally reopened their audit. The findings were undeniable. Misappropriation of funds, falsified expense reports, and contracts signed without authorization. There were too many to bury this time. The decision was unanimous. Daniel was permanently barred from serving in any executive capacity. His name was quietly removed from all remaining company materials. I didn't push for criminal charges, not because I pitted him, but because I didn't need to. Losing everything he built was punishment enough. When the ruling went public, he tried to fight it. He called reporters, posted vague rants online about family betrayal and corporate manipulation, but no one took him seriously anymore. People had seen the documents. They knew the truth. His name became synonymous with arrogance and failure, a cautionary tale whispered about in business circles. Then, one night, I got a message from him. No greeting, just one line. "You took everything from me." I read it twice before replying. "No, Daniel, you gave it away." He never responded. Months passed, and life began to settle into something almost peaceful. My parents started reaching out again, slowly, awkwardly, but genuinely. I didn't hold grudges. I'd spent too many years carrying that weight. When my mom invited me over for dinner one evening, it felt strange at first. The same table, the same dishes, but everything was different now. There were no comparisons, no backhanded compliments, no mentions of who was doing better. Just quiet conversation, a few laughs, and long pauses where the air finally felt honest. At one point, my dad poured us both a glass of wine and said softly, "I used to think success meant never falling. But maybe it's about what you do after you've been pushed down." I nodded. "Maybe." He looked at me for a moment, then added, "You're a better man than I gave you credit for." That sentence, simple as it was, meant more to me than any apology could have. As for Daniel, I didn't see him again for almost a year. But one rainy afternoon, I spotted him across the street outside a coffee shop. He was sitting alone by the window, hunched over a cheap laptop, wearing a faded jacket and a look of quiet defeat. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no hatred there anymore, just exhaustion. Recognition. He nodded once. I nodded back. That was it. No words. Just a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us. The rivalry, the resentment, the years of pretending. When I walked away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Because in the end, revenge hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about freeing myself from the years of comparison, from the need to prove anything to anyone, from the weight of being less than. That night, back home, I sat by the window with a drink in hand, watching the city lights flicker below. Somewhere out there, my brother was probably trying to start over. I hoped he did. Not for him, but because I'd finally stopped needing to be the opposite of him. I'd spent a lifetime chasing respect, but what I'd really wanted all along was peace. And I had it now. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the shadow or the disappointment or the quiet one at the table. I was just me, and that was finally enough.